Hey moms, it's Laura Ollinger. Welcome to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast. This is part 2 of my conversation with the Badass Rebellion, Dr. Avery Honig, PhD clinical psychologist, Dr. Lucy Smith, PhD in clinical psychology, and Dr. Jamie Wilson, PhD in counseling psychology.
Yeah. And how does all this affect, we talked about modeling earlier, but kind of what we might call like the unhealthy parenting person who's just not, independent, not got their own identity, really, codependent. How does all that affect your kids?
Yeah.
Well, I think that one way is when we don't allow our kids independence, like it subtly, or maybe not so subtly, sends the message that we don't think that they're capable or that they can do it, right? And in some ways it may feel nice, right? So if my kid's really busy and I say, oh, you don't have time, I'll just do it for you. Sometimes that's maybe helpful, but doing too much of that over the long term sends the message of like, you can't handle everything in life. Like I need to step in. And the only way that we develop confidence and trust in ourselves is it's that self-efficacy by like doing it, struggling with it, seeing that we're able to do it, even when we didn't think we could. And so I think that that's one of the biggest things. If we're too enmeshed as a parent or too involved or not giving them, our kids, autonomy or responsibility, like it just hamstrings them a little bit, not only in their skills, but in their self-concept and in their sense of like competence and confidence.
And that's where that anxiety can become contagious, right? If I'm too anxious to let my child go do this without me, well, then my child starts to get the message of like, oh, it's really scary out there. Something terrible is going to happen to me. And so they're going to cling to me, which maybe feels really amazing if I'm feeling super anxious. But again, from like that aerial view, like goal setting, like that's not getting us, that's not moving the needle where, to the direction we need it to go. And I think that's where to me, that feels like the first kind of step is to really take stock and realize that like, we can't just stay, feels so good to be snuggled up with your little kid, but like, that's just not how they stay. And we've got to kind of notice, where we need to go. What are the things we need to do to get them, launched?
So where do boundaries fall into this whole conversation? Because that's something that we, talk a lot about as professionals, but also it's just, I feel like a topic that literally every day just somehow comes up, whether it's in my own life or, family or friends. And we just got out of Thanksgiving where having strong boundaries is really important. If we're kind of in some family dynamics that we need to have some boundaries, that we don't want to go there. We don't want to talk about that. There's certain things that are just like, nope, that's not going to work for us. So how does that come into this relationship with the mother teenager situation?
Gosh, I think that's such a good question. Honestly, I think for us as moms, I think a lot of times we're taught that we should not have boundaries. I mean, if you think about like when you actually are, whether you're pregnant or tending to a very young child, there's like no boundaries. Like everybody's all over everywhere. Like there's so much physical, like it can feel very boundaryless. And that can feel like rewarded and like being a good mom is to be constantly available, tending to everybody's needs at all times. And that is something that I think I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's something that we can start to model very early on, that we are humans that have needs. And whether that's a need for some quiet, to take a breath, or need to take a shower, or need to whatever it might be, tend to yourself and train for a marathon, whatever it might be. But that is something I think does not really get very reinforced by society is our need for boundaries with our children. But gosh, I think it's so important. I'm so glad you brought that up. What about you guys, Jamie and Lucy? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think one of the hardest things probably for moms is the guilt, that you feel when you set boundaries. I mean, I hear that a lot from all the workshops that we've done. It's kind of one of the number one things that folks experience when they try to set a boundary, whatever that boundary looks like, is this sort of, there's this, oh, I feel guilty, for doing that. And so I think, as Lucy, sort of stated earlier, I think it's really important to kind of tune in to what it is that you need to do, that you need to say, like, what are the needs that you need to get met? And so, yes, if you're a mom and you haven't had a shower for 3 days, maybe it's time that you set a boundary and ask for help. And, those things can be really hard, especially if you're not used to setting them.
Yes, completely. And then what about, there's all those other little elements like fear of judgment, or people, they're thinking you're selfish, or, because there's kind of like maybe what I would call like the old moms, the moms before the new you, where that's your old crew and they all do it their way. And then maybe you have your kind of newer moms that they're more empowered, they're more independent, they have their strong identity. And so it's like sometimes these moms are like right in the middle and they're kind of teeter-tottering on this line, and they feel sucked back into their old ways or their old friends. So how do you kind of like push those moms like towards that positive change?
I think one of the things we talk about with regards to boundaries specifically is if the only way we can feel okay setting a boundary is if no one has feelings about it, like we're in big trouble, right? Because I think by definition, when we set boundaries, people are going to have feelings, right? Avery uses the example, right? Like if, right, like we're all going to go to dinner and like Jamie wants Chinese food and I want Mexican food. Like you can't please everyone, right? And it's just not possible. And so I think if we start from the default place of people are going to have feelings about that, and I can tolerate that discomfort that comes up in response, we're in much better shape than starting from the place of how do I set a boundary that no one has feelings about? Does that make sense? And so if we like put our energy towards how do I cope with this difficult and uncomfortable feeling when it comes up, because it's bound to, like, I think we're much better served if we look at it like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a good point.
And I think too, kind of going back to what Lucy said earlier, that mindfulness, that awareness, I think so often we as women can be really disconnected from ourselves. And it can almost feel like so long since we set a boundary or so long since we tuned into ourselves, like we almost don't even know like who that is, what we would say. And so what I would say to women that are maybe starting that journey is to like, start to just tune in. It can be as simple as just, putting your hand on your heart, putting your hand on your belly and thinking, what do I want? What do I need? Who's in there? Who is in there? And really tending to self. And I find like it is amazing to me how clear my intuition can be when I do that. It's like, oh, I want a shower. Okay, in order to get a shower, I'm going to need to get everybody out of here. They're going to be like, it can be very clear. And so you don't have to get so caught up in the like, what's the right or the wrong thing to do. It can be more like, oh, this is super clear. This is what I need. And then to Lucy's point, I can deal with you being disappointed or you being judgy, or because I'm really clear that I'm doing what feels necessary, what feels like the right thing for me to do.
Right. I can deal with it, but I don't have to be responsible for it.
That's right. That's right. Love that.
So I kind of want to get real personal here for a second. I want to share a little bit about me. Because I don't often do that with my audience of the positively healthy moms. And so when I was kind of describing the old group and the new group, that was kind of me. And so I used to be this person who I didn't have an identity. I was a married woman. I had 4 children, and that's all I was. I'm not going to claim I was the super room mom person for everything, but I was like, all I saw myself was as a wife and a mother. And I really lost my own identity. And so through a lot of kind of chaos in my life, I ended up having to go through a divorce. I ended up doing all the work to find myself, to kind of empower myself, to build my own identity, to now, build my own company and all these things. And so it's like, I'm very passionate about this topic. And that's why I love the name of your company, The Badass Rebellion, because that just speaks to me so incredibly much. It just feels really empowering to me, because it's like, many years ago, I never could have dreamed of being a badass. And it's like, now I feel like I am a badass. And so it's like, so exciting to me just that you guys are doing this work. And so tell me, like, just really what spoke to you all personally about like helping moms and helping women to really find themselves?
I think it's actually exactly what you're describing. Is I think that so often women are defined by their roles, especially roles of mom and wife. And we are so much more than that. I think about Laura, even when you and I met, we were neither wives nor moms, right. And we were fully formed identity humans. Like as much as you can be, I guess, in your 20s, but like right. We were our own selves. We were people that had wants and desires and passions and thoughts. And like, that was something that was so exciting and so wonderful. And I think somewhere along the way, we get the message that our roles define us, and that our roles, whether it's as a parent or as a spouse, or even, as a coworker, as a boss, like that we really get defined by that. And I think that that's what we really are rebelling against, is that idea that women should be defined only by their roles and not by kind of their own internal like passions, who they are, their own identities. And so I'm so glad that you shared that, because I think that that's exactly the kind of journey that we would love for our community members to take, as well as that idea of, I actually can have my own thoughts, my own desires, my own needs, and I'm going to have to set some boundaries to get those met and deal with some feelings around those boundaries as well. But that's worthwhile. It's important work to do.
Well, and I think part of the motivation for us, and I won't speak on your behalf, Jamie and Avery, but like there's this personal piece, right? So I think all of us, are wives and mothers, and then we're in the mental health field where you are literally trained to like make yourself obscure, like not part of the equation almost. So to like, to in favor of like your client in the room, you're kind of taught that. And so I think most of the three of us maybe felt like along the way kind of losing parts of ourselves. And I think part of this project that we started when we started the podcast was, how do we bring in these other areas of our life that have been dormant, that seem exciting and collaborative and creative, this whole other part, and how do we start to integrate some of that? I think that was really like a personal motivator for us in this project too.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. Like I was very much looking for something to do that was creative. I mean, there's a certain aspect of creativity that you have to have, I think being a parent, and then also to being in the mental health field, but that wasn't the creativity that I was looking for. Like I really enjoy creativity and fun and play and humor and all of those things. And sometimes, just with the busyness of life and all of the changes that come in midlife, it can just suck that right out of you. And so I found that it was really important for me and my mental health to get back to that and rediscover those pieces of myself that maybe have been kind of camouflaged for a while.
And now that I see this kind of, I love myself part of me, I'm so excited about being able to, as a mom, share that with my 4 kids. So I've got 2 girls, a 15 and 11-year-old, and then 2 boys who are 12 and 14. And so I love that they see their mom who's happy, who loves herself, who has her own identity, who has her own life. And, as much as no one wants to ever have to go through a divorce, I feel like that was obviously my big wake up call. And if I had never gone through the divorce, I would have been the old me for who knows how long. At some point, things inevitably just blow up in some way. Some change maybe has to happen in some way because circumstances. But had I just been that old version of myself, that wouldn't have been good for my kids. That wouldn't have been serving my kids. So, not that we're here to talk about divorce, but for the people who are like on the fence, should I not? Is that going to hurt my kids? Is it going to damage them? I'm here to say my kids have experienced so much positivity about, they do have their 2 separate households, but they come to mine, and I don't speak for what's over there, but I speak for mine. And we have a great environment here. It's fun. It's happy. It's engaging. It's supportive. It's a bunch of teenagers in my house at all times, but I really like being kind of the leader for my kids.
Well, and I think what you're talking about there is that you were tuning back into yourself. You were really clear, and you were able to get really clear on, this is what is right for me. I've lost myself, and I need to find my way back to myself. And part of that was, it sounds like part of that journey was the end of your marriage, but it was also like the beginning of so many other things. And I think you had that clarity, and that is the key, I think, is getting back to who you are, in touch with yourself. And I think especially we as women are not necessarily taught that's such a great guide, but it is. I mean, that just intuition, that gut feeling, and kind of what we were saying before, getting silent and quiet and kind of tuning back in can be such a powerful, process, or really practice, to kind of keep moving yourself in the right direction. I love that. Yeah.
And I have to say, one of my therapists gave me great advice. So by the way, I met to many, many therapists throughout the course of several years. I did every EMDR, I did somatic, I did, talk therapy, like every type. And one of the things she wanted me to do one time was to just sit down and figure out what I like or what I want. And, like you said, tune into your mindfulness, kind of go like this. And it was weird because there were so many times I tried to do that and I would just come up blank. I would be like, I don't know. I'm so disconnected from myself, so far, that I couldn't even figure out like what I like or what I wanted. And so I feel like I want to encourage moms today, now that this is coming up, to just keep going. It's like a muscle that, it starts off really, really weak. You can't even lift that little 1 pound, weight, the dumbbell. It's like ridiculously light for some people, but for others it's heavy. And so it's like, keep going, keep doing those reps over and over again, and you'll get there. And just kind of, you have to go through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I always tell people like the process is to like tune in and listen. It's not to get an answer. So that makes it, sometimes people get frustrated if they don't like hear anything in response, but the practice is just like being still and listening and tuning in. And exactly as you were saying, if you do that enough, you start to be able to hear it. This idea that we all have this intuition and this wise mind. And sometimes it's like trapped beneath a trap door, like, or down the well a little bit. But if we just keep showing up, we will reconnect.
I do. I think it gets trapped. I also think that we can like logic our way out of it, and we can say, okay, well, I'm really clear that I want to quit my job. But then it's like immediately, well, then what would I do for money? Well, I can't ever quit my job. And like, we kind of can shut it down so quickly versus just kind of listening with openness of like, okay, well, what is it? What is it about today? Do I feel exhausted? Like, what is the thing that's kind of coming up for me? And almost like reestablishing that trust with yourself. Like if we're, if you're going to shoot down every idea that you come up with, well, it may be harder to hear. But if you're like, okay, what's that about? Is that we've had a bad day? Is that really we're pretty clear that there are parts of my job I need to stop doing, or I need to stop it, whatever it is. But really just kind of continuing that conversation, much like you would with a child. I mean, to be able to say, okay, let's really continue. Let's figure out what it is that you want, what it is that you need. And then we later can figure out how we get that and the logistics involved in that. But it's really about kind of reestablishing that connection.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are the kind of societal trends or things that are happening today that contribute to all of these, moms being so disconnected? I'm not saying everybody's disconnected, but for the moms who are feeling disconnected, whether they're trapped in their identity as just a mom and a wife, or, other contributing factors, how does all of, what's going on in today's world contribute to that?
I think one thing is we're not really taught to tune inward. So that makes sense. So I think we spend a lot of our lives being taught like, here's the way you're supposed to do it. Here's the rule. Here's the system. Here's the checklist you need to go down to. So there's a lot of conditioning to kind of look outward, especially for those of us who like to be like good girls and get the gold stars. So I think that there's a lot of that. And then this practice of like listening, being still, being slow. Our world is pretty fast and there's a lot of distractions and a lot to keep us very busy, which is totally antithetical to tuning in and like slowing down. What do y'all think, Jamie and Avery? What else comes to mind?
Social media.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
I mean, that's a huge, that's just a huge one, really. I mean, I think, again, like you're just seeing curated things that people are putting up on social media. And so you don't get to see like all the messy parts of parenting or being a human most of the time on social media. Usually it's the HGTV, version of it. And so, and I think if you engage in social comparison, and we can't help it. I mean, I think like that's just something naturally that happens as human beings. I mean, we don't want to be like rejected from the tribe, and so we're always trying to find the place where we belong, or worse, where we're trying to fit in. And so I think social media, or just media in general, has a lot to do with it. And I think we're always being pressured to like, either, buy the next product, or, purchase this book, or, listen to, this or that particular expert. And sometimes that can really like, while some of that is great, if we're really trying to seek out knowledge, I think other times it can cause us to second guess ourselves. And then we're reliant on other people who aren't necessarily in touch with like our unique individual situation that would be right for us.
Exactly. Well, it's another way that it pulls us outside of ourselves, right? That it pulls our focus external rather than internal. Right. And another image we've talked about before is this idea of like taking your other people's temperature to determine if you're sick. So if I was like, okay, I think I'm cold. Is it cold in here, Lucy? Are you cold, Jamie? How about you, Laura? Are you cold? And you were, it doesn't really matter if I'm cold. That's information I can have just with me. Right. And so that I love that image of like taking everybody else's temperature when really you got to put the thermometer in your own mouth to determine if you're sick. And that idea is, I think social media does a really nice job of pulling our focus on all kinds of like, infinite comparison traps, right? And I think also kind of trying to focus on, gold stars in roles, all of those kinds of things are ways that we kind of focus outward, which is, it's a human thing. We do it. It's not a bad thing, but I think it's, as Lucy has said too, to kind of come back as a practice of tuning back in is really the goal, so that you're kind of maintaining that conversation.
We've started to use the language like self-abandonment, like all the ways that we kind of abandon ourselves. And then how do we just start to become really good at catching that and then coming back to center? Because I think we all do it. I think it's a normal part of being human, but we want to do it less, right? So we can stay really connected and grounded in ourselves.
So the Positively Healthy Mom audience is moms of all ages. But what about the moms who are in midlife? First of all, how do we define that? And second of all, if you've spent half your life being a certain way, how do you then make positive changes?
Yeah. So I think, I would define midlife. If you feel like you're in midlife, you're in midlife. I think in general, it's right around like 35 to 40 to like 50 to 65.
Yeah.
50 to 65.
Yeah.
And I think that probably, it probably starts like that kind of midlife awakening can kind of start in your late 30s, early 40s. And I really think that there's a process that's happening around that time, even biologically, that really does shift your mindset a bit. You're really, from a physical perspective, you're going from like your more fertile years to your less fertile years. You've got all these, biological hormonal changes that are happening, like those nurturing hormones like estrogen are kind of going down. So there's a whole lot that's happening physiologically that's really changing your body chemistry. I think there's also a lot that happens like socially. That really you're going from this part of your life where the pressure is to, get married, get a house, get your family, that there's not really this clear, distinct path of like, checkpoints that you're supposed to be meeting. And so for some people, it can feel almost like the rug's been pulled out from under them. Like, what am I supposed to do now? I've checked all my boxes. I'm out of boxes. For some people, it can feel like an amazing freedom. A lot of us are kind of somewhere in the middle. And so I think it's really just, acknowledging that, one, that's okay. That's what it's supposed to happen. You're supposed to kind of move into this other chapter of your life where really you do get to tend to yourself in a different way. And I think that mindfulness, meditation is huge, but that kind of coming back to yourself is such a great guide. What would you guys add, Lucy and Jamie?
Lucy, or
Did you
have anything to add?
No, Laura, what was the second part of your question? It was with
making positive changes. How do you encourage people to make positive changes?
Yeah, if they come to you and they're in a rut and they're feeling sad, like, where you can, just like Avery just said, we're losing our kind of youthfulness and we're in midlife, and that can be kind of depressing. Like, how do you encourage people to kind of embrace that positive side of themselves?
So I think one is just to normalize it, like to know you're not alone. There's such power in it, being able to put words to something like, here's what it is, and we're not alone in it. And then like, what are the possibilities? Because I think we could look at it as like the end of something and it's all downhill, right? But I think part of what we're wanting to rebel against are those narratives that the best years are behind you. And so how do we start to reframe it differently?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it's like both and, right? You're going to grieve some stuff, I grieve, like I'm not having kids anymore, and there's freedom with that, so I think it's embracing both parts, not shooting past the grief or the loss or the disappointment sometimes with getting older, but also too, as Lucy said, embracing those opportunities of like, what's coming around the bend now.
That's right. And that's what we really want to do at the Badass Rebellion, is to really offer a community and space to do that. And to, like, one of our favorite phrases is to let it all belong. Let all the feelings, all the experiences belong. And rather than meeting them with fear, anxiety of like, there's something wrong, to be able to kind of soften and process and accept maybe some of the disappointments, but also, to become excited about the things that can happen in the future.
I think all this stuff goes just really well together, beautifully, because it's just like I'm imagining I'm no longer, putting myself in this position in these shoes, but in the old, actually, maybe the old me would have been a great version of this where, I'm aging, I'm losing some of my youthfulness. And maybe before that was how I got my attention from my husband or from society or from social media. Right. And now it's like, whoa, what's inside of that? Because, the whole world does care about, physical image, but we live in Texas, and Texas is big on, physical appearance. So, as kind of a last thought, how could you encourage moms to just go inside and to love themselves?
Sure. I mean, I think that one of my favorite ways to do that is to think about the people that I love and to think about how little that has to do with their physical appearance. I mean, I love Lucy and Jamie, and that has nothing to do with the way that they look. It has everything to do with who they are in the world. And if that's why I love them, that's probably why they love me too. So I think that can really kind of change that angle a little bit.
I think that's great. That's such a great point. So, okay, one last time, tell us how everyone can find you again.
Sure, we're the Badass Rebellion, and you can just find all of our information on our website. It's badassrebellion.com, and you can get on our email list. We send out emails every week that are part story, part little tips and tricks and little tidbits, and we really love those. We also have our podcast linked there, and you can kind of find out more about what we have coming up as far as offerings there as well.
Very cool. Okay. Well, and I have my own free gift for everyone today, which you can go to the Positively Healthy Mom /badass, because I love that word so much. I think it's amazing. And so Lucy, Jamie, and Dr. Avery, thank you. Or you're all doctors, actually. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for listening to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast, because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.